You got me, Matthew Wright, here with your Saturday breakfast. I'm feeling particularly perky this fine day, the 8th of November. Why? Well, in part thanks to you. Lots of you are tuning in for this show. The latest Rachel Figure show, our little weekend endeavour, continues to grow apace. So I'd just like to say thank you to the regular listeners and all the new listeners for choosing us each weekend. Nice one. I suspect the main reason I'm in such a jolly good mood is that a 4-year legal battle I've endured with the mobile phone giant after I was allegedly overcharged by £7 finally came to an end, actually, just weeks before we were due to face each other in court. They've withdrawn their claim against me, so while I'm still £7 worse off than I was before I was overcharged, I'm now not being chased for more than £1,000 money they said I owed for breaking a contract that they'd already broken. It felt very much like, I don't know if any of you have ever done this, taken on one of the big boys, but it felt very much like I was being bullied for daring to point out their error. They never offered to refund my £7, and so they lost a customer more than 18 years standing, and heaven knows how much more they've wasted dragging me to court. I have to say, though, that while I have a moral victory, I'm not entirely sure all the stress was worth it. I think I'm fortunate in that I had enough in savings to risk losing in court if it came to that, but I'm not sure I could have endured the whole process had I not been in that position. Justice, eh? Now then, a little later in the programme, we're going to take a deep dive into the state of education in England, and I'm asking if there's too much emphasis on the national curriculum to the detriment, really, of all the other good stuff that kids can and should be learning in school. A huge survey of parents suggests there is, so what needs to change? Is it as simple as saying we need more art subjects, more real-world skills, maybe more fun, life skills? Is that what's missing? First, though, everyone seems to be going crazy trying to second-guess Chancellor Rachel Reeves' budget plans. I thought we should maybe take a step back, as really no one outside of Downing Street has a clue what's coming at the end of the month. What we can ask with a degree of certainty, though, is whether promises not to raise taxes, manifesto promises made in the run-up to last year's election, promises that may very well have persuaded you to vote Labour, are those promises ultimately worth the paper they're written on? Now, this government, to be fair, wouldn't be the first to break a manifesto pledge. I mean, if you go back to Boris Johnson's run as PM, he broke loads. But I suppose what I'm really asking is whether any party's manifesto is worth the paper it's written on. And if they're not, as I'm starting to believe, then are we fools to buy into them, to feel let down when those promises are smashed to smithereens weeks, months or even years later? 0345 6060 973, the number if you want to get in early, your thoughts on manifesto pledges. Because in the last, 48 hours or so, newspapers led by The Times have claimed that Rachel Reeves is going to raise income tax because she's apparently told the Office of Budget Responsibility just this. She's said to be considering a 2p rise in income tax and a 2p cut in national insurance, which would effectively cancel out the increased burden on workers and move it on to other groups. Landlords, pensioners, but such a move would be a direct contradiction of Labour's 2024 election manifesto pledge not to raise income tax, not to raise taxes on working people. However, working people is defined. Now, various newspaper reports suggest that manifesto-breaking tax rises are the predominant mindset within Cabinet, but not for new Labour Deputy PM Lucy Powell, who on Thursday urged Reeves not to break that manifesto pledge, while also urging the Chancellor to scrap the two-child benefit cap. And while I can say there's a strong argument that the costs of axing the two-child benefit cap are possibly lower than the gains to be had from lifting countless folk out of poverty, I'm not sure it appears like sort of sound economic reasoning to dismiss tax rises out of hand while simultaneously urging the Chancellor to spend billions more. I mean, where's the money going to come from? But of course, and there's also no doubt the economy was in dire straits when Labour came to power. Our last Tory PM, Rishi Sunak, he raised the UK tax burden to its highest since World War II. But while our patience for Labour, blaming everything on the Tories, seems to be growing thin, the government still faces this massive financial black hole, somewhere between 20 and 30 billion pounds. So in her speech this week, warming us up for the prospect of tax rises, and no Chancellor has raised the basic rate of income tax since Labour's Dennis Healey in 1975, Reeves changed the narrative from blaming Sunak and Jeremy Hunt for all our problems. She went further back this week, citing George Osborne's miserable austerity project from 2010, the rushed and ill-conceived Brexit deal that Boris Johnson foisted on us, and also our lack of preparedness for COVID, which are all fair points, I'm sure. But you made a promise in that election manifesto last year. You promised us you wouldn't raise direct taxes on working people. So how dare you even consider such things? Now, again, in a speech this week, Reeves acknowledges how the world has thrown more challenges our way. And I don't doubt she's right on that score. But she agreed to that manifesto pledge. Reeves did. No one else forces her to stick to self-imposed financial rules that arguably have made it more difficult still for her to react quickly to a changing world. She's done that. Why make promises you can't keep? Is it to con votes from us mugs? 0345 6060 973, the number. Or does the blame for any feelings of anger and disappointment at the prospect for higher taxes perhaps lay closer to home? Because as I said at the start, Boris Johnson broke so many manifesto pledges it was hard to keep track when he was PM. He broke that promise to maintain overseas aid at 0.7% of GDP. He broke a promise to maintain the energy price cap. His promise to build 40 new hospitals, little more than a sick joke. A pledge to put a high-speed rail linking Leeds and Manchester for that northern powerhouse that got stopped at the junction. His promise to end the injustice of the elderly being forced to sell their homes to pay for care also came to now. All manifesto pledges. So if you live through the Johnson years... haven't we only got ourselves to blame if we feel disappointed when a government breaks a manifesto pledge? It's our fault, is it, for buying into this nonsense in the first place? Am I sounding overly cynical at this ungodly hour? 0345 6060 973, the number. Now, in a moment, I'm going to speak to a former spokesperson for the Labour Party, James Matthewson. But first, I'm joined by Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. That's Danny Sriskandarajah. Good morning to you, Danny.
Morning, Matthew.
If I can start really with that last point first, are we a nation of fools for buying into manifesto pledges in the first place when history tells us they get broken by almost any day of the week?
Well, I love how you started the morning saying you were feeling perky and then you ran through a list of broken promises. What a way to start a Saturday morning. Well, look, I do think there's a sort of conspiracy of silence amongst our mainstream politicians about the state of public finances. And so, every election we get our political parties not really willing to talk honestly about what needs to happen. And what needs to happen is we do have a gap between the resources we need to raise to keep our public services functioning and in a good state and what we currently pay. There is a gap, and that gap's going to increase with an aging population, less of us working, technological changes. And so the sort of gaps we're talking about today are only going to increase. And that leaves politicians with a big set of choices. Do they want to slash public services and reduce what's on offer in terms of healthcare and education and social housing and all of those good things that the state provides us? Or do they want to increase taxes to be able to pay for that? And that's where we've got the gap in promises.
I agree, but I'm kind of mystified as to why successive governments can't have that honest conversation with us. What are they afraid of? What is the barrier to having a truthful conversation about the state of the nation?
Well, it must be because when it comes to elections, they do everything they can to win the election. And they say, look, we don't want to be the ones saying, be the doomsayer saying we're going to have to raise taxes. But it comes to the point you were making earlier, which is there's one way of saying to say, look, it's really tough, but trust us, we're going to lead well. But there's also the sort of self-imposed restrictions that they put on themselves. They overpromise. They say, no, of course we're not going to do that. And then we're not going to do this, this, and this. And by the time they get into power, they don't really...
Oh, the line's just...
things that they want to do or they need to do.
Do you think it's ever going to change?
Yes. It'll have to change for a couple of reasons. One is trust in politics, and you mentioned it earlier. Something like 7% of British people think our elected politicians act in the national interest. That figure has just been falling and falling and falling for decades, right? And so at some point, we're gonna say, as a nation, this isn't good enough. You're not going to have to, and that's what creates the room, I suppose, for more radical or extreme voices in politics who say the system is broken, trust us. We're going to break it all, burn it all down and start again. And then the other thing, of course, is that the reality will start to bite. A lot of economists say we can't have European levels of public services with US levels of taxation. And that's sort of what's happening. Sort of levels of taxation we have are starting to fall, and the gap between what we're generating and what we need to provide the public services that people want is growing. And so at some point there will be a sort of breaking point and a moment of reckoning that will happen.
Do you believe, it's the last question, just a little bit of mischief really, do you believe any party's manifesto pledges?
Look, I think there's a set of aspirations they have, but then it's up to the choices. Politicians have choices in front of them. And, one of my worries about income taxes, for example, is Rachel Reeves has boxed herself. First of all, it is undoubtedly the case that this is a tough economic situation, but she's boxed herself in. She's boxed herself in with those so-called fiscal rules. And then she's only got three choices. She can go after people who don't work by cutting welfare benefits, but that didn't work for the Labour Party over the last few months because of the backbench rebellion. She could go after people who don't have to work because they're rich and they're collecting income from their assets. And we know the rich in this country are getting richer, but she doesn't want to do that too much because she fears those people will leave or there's a sort of backlash from the city. So what then she's left with is working people. And these are people who are working hard but struggling to get by in a cost of living crisis. And that's why it will be so awful if they do end up going after people who are just about managing and increasing the taxation on them.
Great explanations, Danny. Really appreciate you giving up your time this Saturday morning. That's Danny Sriskandarajah from the New Economics Foundation think tank. Let's bring James Matthewson now, former spokesperson for the Labour Party. Morning, James.
Good morning, Matthew.
So what's a manifesto pledge mean to you, James, these days?
Not really worth the paper it's written on. They're not even written on paper anymore, Matthew.
No,
that's the thing. They're all digital.
So,
yeah.
Why have we come to this situation? I can't help. I mean, I pointed out Boris Johnson, and I can remember very clearly. I was sort of agog at the amount of manifesto pledges that he bulldozed. Mm-hmm. Is that where the rot set in, or have we been used to sort of politicians promise us one thing to get our votes and then delivering something else completely different when they're in power? Does that go back further?
Yeah, I think it goes back quite a long way now, to a point where people, if people have this perception, and one thing I heard from starting my political career when I was in my early 20s and door knocking for the Labour Party around the country, the thing you heard was you're all the same, you're all liars, and to a point, you would contest it, and that's fine, and argue against it. But the more you hear it, and the more you realise that people think that, the perception exists anyway. So you think, well, it gives politicians wiggle room. They operate within that. And because they think, oh, well, nobody believes us anyway, everyone thinks we're liars already, will it be that huge if we do abandon this manifesto pledge? And when they're in a desperate situation, as was just laid out there before us, we know that Rachel Reeves has boxed herself in, then she's looking for a way out. She's looking for options. And it comes down to the least worst. And I think right now, electorally, they realise that the next election is going to be an absolute nightmare for them. So it's about the kind of immediate survival.
But the consequences of being seen to break, and I suppose there's within a manifesto that you could grade the different pledges, and I would say that the pledge not to raise taxes, which is that's your blue ribboned top pledge, and to sort of bulldoze that, she would. I mean, I took Danny's point that in many ways these manifestos are aspirational, but that's not what the politicians tell us. They're pledges, they're promises.
They're meant to be a contract with the public. And they should be. I do firmly believe that they should be held to that account. It should be almost legally binding. I know that's utopian politics. Mm-hmm. It's never going to happen. But they should be, really. They should be taken with that reverence and that level of commitment, because a vote is a powerful thing. For somebody to put their vote, in your box, for them to check your box in an election is a privilege, right? And you should be able to say that you've done it in an honest way and everything you've outlined. Now, the only people who benefit from this collapse, as Danny was saying, are those people who are able to promise the world and never have to deliver it. The likes of Nigel Farage. He can, in this landscape, he can promise whatever the hell he wants, because he can say, well, look, Labour didn't deliver anything. The Tories haven't delivered anything they promised.
No one seems to be delivering anything they promised. James Matthewson, pleasure speaking to you as per. And it does feel like that, doesn't it? That no politician seems to be capable of delivering on the promises they make.